In the early 19th century, North America stood at a crossroads. Vast territories stretched across deserts, mountains, forests, and rivers, while young nations struggled to define their futures. Among them was Mexico, a newly independent country attempting to recover from years of conflict and political turmoil. To the north, the United States was growing rapidly, driven by a belief that its destiny was to expand across the continent. The collision between these two nations would lead to one of the most significant conflicts in North American history, the Mexican-American War. To understand how this war began, we must first return to the year 1830. Mexico had gained its independence from Spain in 1821 after a long and bloody struggle that lasted more than a decade. Victory brought freedom, but it did not bring stability. The new nation inherited enormous challenges. It controlled a vast territory stretching from Central America to lands that today form much of the southwestern United States. On a map, Mexico appeared powerful and immense. In reality, however, the country was struggling to survive. Years of warfare had devastated the economy. Government institutions were weak, public finances were nearly exhausted, and political factions competed relentlessly for power. Different groups envisioned different futures for the nation. Some supported a centralized government, while others demanded a federal system. Military leaders frequently intervened in politics, causing governments to rise and fall with alarming speed. The challenges did not stop there. Mexico faced threats from internal rebellions, regional separatist movements, and even the possibility of renewed Spanish intervention from nearby Cuba. Governing such a large territory with limited resources proved nearly impossible. Communication was slow, infrastructure was underdeveloped, and distant provinces often felt disconnected from the central government in Mexico City. While Mexico struggled with instability, another nation was moving in the opposite direction. The United States was expanding at an extraordinary pace. Following its independence, the young republic had steadily pushed westward. American settlers moved deeper into lands inhabited by Native American nations, while political leaders sought opportunities to acquire new territories. The Louisiana Purchase from France had already doubled the size of the country, opening enormous possibilities for future expansion. Yet many American politicians believed even greater opportunities lay ahead. One region in particular became a source of tension between the two nations: Texas. Throughout the 1820s and 1830s, increasing numbers of American settlers migrated into Texas, which was then part of Mexico. Over time, cultural, political, and economic differences between these settlers and the Mexican government grew more pronounced. The situation eventually erupted into conflict. In 1836, Texas declared its independence from Mexico and established itself as a separate republic. Although Texas achieved victory on the battlefield, Mexico refused to recognize its independence and continued to view the territory as an integral part of the nation. The newly independent Republic of Texas soon sought annexation by the United States. Initially, American leaders hesitated. The issue was politically controversial, especially because Texas would likely enter the Union as a slave state. Northern politicians feared that annexation would upset the balance of power between free and slave states. At the same time, Mexican officials warned that any attempt to annex Texas would be considered a hostile act and could lead to war. Despite these warnings, the idea of annexation remained popular among many Americans. The turning point came during the presidential election of 1844. James K. Polk campaigned on an ambitious expansionist platform. He supported the annexation of Texas and advocated American control over additional western territories. Polk believed the United States should extend from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific. His vision reflected a powerful ideology known as manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were destined to spread their institutions and civilization across North America. After Polk's election victory, events moved rapidly. Texas was formally annexed by the United States on December 29, 1845, becoming the 28th state. However, annexation did not solve existing disputes. Instead, it intensified them. The central issue involved the border. Texas claimed that its southern boundary extended to the Rio Grande River. Mexico rejected this claim and argued that the border lay farther north at the Nueces River. The disputed region between these rivers became a dangerous flashpoint. Meanwhile, President Polk sought to acquire additional territories, including California and New Mexico. He offered to purchase these lands from Mexico, but Mexican leaders refused. Diplomatic negotiations failed. Soon afterward, Polk ordered American troops under General Zachary Taylor to move into the disputed territory between the Rio Grande and the Nueces River, to Mexico. This appeared to be a direct military provocation. To the United States, it was presented as a defensive deployment on American soil. As soldiers from both nations gathered in the contested zone, war seemed increasingly inevitable. The spark finally came on April 25, 1846. A detachment of Mexican cavalry attacked an American patrol operating within the disputed area. Several American soldiers were killed, and others were captured. The incident immediately escalated tensions. News quickly reached Washington. President Polk declared that Mexico had shed American blood upon American soil and argued that military action was now unavoidable. On May 13, 1846, the United States Congress officially declared war. Mexico never issued a formal declaration in the same manner, but full-scale hostilities had already begun. Historians continue to debate responsibility for the outbreak of the conflict. Critics argued that Polk deliberately placed troops in the disputed territory to provoke a confrontation. Even Ulysses S. Grant, who later became a famous Civil War general and President of the United States, wrote in his memoirs that he believed the movement of American forces was intended to trigger a war. Whatever the intentions, the result was clear. Two neighboring nations were now locked in a struggle that would dramatically reshape the map of North America. For Mexico, the conflict came at the worst possible moment. Political instability remained severe, and divisions within the government weakened the country's ability to respond effectively. At the center of this turmoil stood one of the most controversial figures in Mexican history, Antonio López de Santa Anna. Santa Anna's political career was remarkable for its constant reversals. Over the years, he had supported different governments, opposed them, and then returned to support new regimes. He had backed the Mexican Empire, helped overthrow it, supported republican institutions, and repeatedly returned to power. By 1846, he had already served multiple terms as president and remained one of the most influential military leaders in the country. As war erupted, Mexican politicians desperately sought experienced leadership. From exile in Cuba, Santa Anna offered his services, claiming he wished to defend Mexico and recover Texas. Mexican authorities agreed to his return, believing that his military experience could help save the nation. What many did not realize was that Santa Anna had also been communicating with American representatives, creating a complex political situation filled with uncertainty and mistrust. Soon, Santa Anna returned to Mexico and assumed command. The stage was now set for a war that would determine the future of the continent. While political turmoil consumed Mexico, American forces began making rapid advances across several fronts. One of the earliest campaigns focused on New Mexico. General Stephen W. Kearny led a force westward into the vast territory. The region was sparsely populated and lightly defended. When American troops arrived in Santa Fe in August 1846, they encountered virtually no resistance. Without firing a shot, Kearny claimed the territory for the United States and established a temporary civilian government. The capture of New Mexico demonstrated a major problem facing Mexico throughout the war. The government simply lacked the resources to defend its enormous northern territories. Distance, poor infrastructure, and political instability made coordinated defense extremely difficult. After securing New Mexico, Kearny turned his attention toward California. California was one of the most distant regions of Mexico, but it possessed tremendous strategic value. Its ports offered direct access to the Pacific Ocean, and American expansionists viewed it as essential for future growth. At the same time, the United States Navy moved aggressively along the Pacific coast. American warships entered California's harbors and established control over key ports. Local Mexican authorities struggled to organize resistance as American forces advanced inland. In July 1846, American troops occupied Monterrey, the capital of Alta California. Mexican officials abandoned their positions and retreated south. Soon afterward, Los Angeles also fell under American control. Although resistance continued in several areas, the balance of power was shifting rapidly. California appeared to be slipping permanently out of Mexican hands. Meanwhile, fighting intensified in northern Mexico. General Zachary Taylor, who had already achieved victories at Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma, continued his advance southward. His forces crossed the Rio Grande and moved toward the city of Monterrey. The battle that followed proved far more difficult than previous engagements. Unlike open-field battles, Monterrey required urban combat. American soldiers had little experience fighting in city streets. Mexican defenders occupied fortified buildings, rooftops, and defensive positions throughout the city. As American troops advanced through the streets, they came under heavy fire. Casualties mounted on both sides. House by house and block by block, the battle became a brutal struggle for control. Eventually, Mexican commander Pedro de Ampudia negotiated terms that allowed his forces to withdraw in exchange for surrendering the city. The victory strengthened Taylor's reputation. But the war was far from over. Back in Mexico, Antonio López de Santa Anna had returned from exile and assumed command of the nation's military forces, determined to stop the American advance. Santa Anna assembled a large army and marched north. In February 1847, he confronted Taylor near Buena Vista. The battlefield favored defense. American troops occupied strong positions among hills and mountain passes. Despite this advantage, Taylor's force numbered only about 4,600 men. Santa Anna arrived with approximately 15,000 soldiers. Confident in his numerical superiority, he demanded the American surrender. Taylor refused. The next morning, one of the war's most famous battles began. Mexican forces launched attacks across a broad front. Cavalry units attempted to outflank American positions while infantry advanced directly against the defensive lines. For hours, the outcome remained uncertain. Several times, Mexican troops pushed the Americans to the brink of collapse, yet American artillery repeatedly stabilized the situation. Mobile horse artillery moved quickly across the battlefield, delivering devastating fire against advancing formations. By the end of the battle, both armies had suffered severe casualties. Although Mexican reports initially claimed victory, Santa Anna ultimately withdrew from the battlefield. After learning of political unrest in Mexico City, the Battle of Buena Vista became one of the defining moments of the war. Many historians have argued that if Santa Anna had continued the attack the following day, he might have achieved a decisive victory. Instead, the opportunity slipped away. While Taylor fought in northern Mexico, the United States prepared a completely different strategy. American leaders recognized that capturing Mexico City would likely end the war. To achieve that objective, they launched an ambitious campaign under General Winfield Scott. Scott's operation would become one of the most remarkable military campaigns of the 19th century. In March 1847, nearly 12,000 American troops arrived by sea at Veracruz, Mexico's most important Gulf Coast port. The landing itself was historic. It was the first large-scale amphibious operation in American military history. Thousands of soldiers came ashore in carefully coordinated waves while naval forces provided support from offshore. The city was quickly surrounded. American artillery bombarded Veracruz for days, gradually wearing down its defenses. Outnumbered and isolated, the Mexican garrison eventually surrendered, with Veracruz secured. Scott began the march toward Mexico City. The route inland passed through rugged terrain and several strong defensive positions. Santa Anna attempted to block the advance at Cerro Gordo. There, Mexican forces occupied high ground overlooking a critical mountain pass. The position appeared formidable, and Santa Anna expected American troops to attack directly into his defenses. Instead, American engineers discovered a route around the Mexican flank. Using this hidden path, Scott launched a surprise attack that shattered the Mexican position. The victory at Cerro Gordo opened the road to the Mexican interior. As American troops advanced, guerrilla fighters harassed supply lines and attacked isolated units. Nevertheless, Scott continued moving steadily toward the capital. By late summer of 1847, American forces stood at the gates of Mexico City. The final campaign involved a series of fierce battles. At Contreras and Churubusco, American troops defeated determined Mexican resistance. Temporary peace negotiations followed, but they ultimately collapsed. The fighting resumed. The next major objective was Chapultepec Castle, perched atop a hill overlooking Mexico City. Chapultepec served as both a military academy and a defensive fortress. Its capture would open the way into the capital. On September 13, 1847, American forces launched their assault. Mexican defenders fought fiercely. Among them were young military cadets who became legendary figures in Mexican history. According to national tradition, several cadets chose death rather than surrender. becoming symbols of patriotism and sacrifice. After intense fighting, American troops captured the fortress. The road to Mexico City now lay open. Soon afterward, American forces entered the capital. For the first time in history, a foreign army occupied Mexico City. General Winfield Scott became military governor of the occupied city. While organized Mexican resistance gradually collapsed, the war was effectively over. Yet the conflict left behind enormous questions. The United States had conquered vast territories and occupied the enemy's capital. Some politicians even suggested annexing all of Mexico. However, such proposals faced strong opposition. Many Americans believed incorporating millions of Mexican citizens would create political and cultural challenges. Others feared the enormous costs of governing such a large territory. Ultimately, American leaders chose a more limited settlement. Negotiations resulted in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed in February 1848. The treaty fundamentally transformed North America. Mexico recognized the Rio Grande as the border with Texas and ceded an immense area of land to the United States. These territories included present-day California, Nevada, Utah, most of Arizona, and large portions of New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. In return, the United States agreed to pay Mexico $15 million and assume certain financial claims. For Mexico, the loss was devastating. The country surrendered nearly half of its pre-war territory. For the United States, the treaty represented one of the greatest territorial expansions in its history. The consequences would be felt for generations. New lands fueled migration, economic growth, and westward expansion. California's gold rush, which began shortly after the war, accelerated settlement even further. Yet the conflict also intensified political debates over slavery. As new territories entered American control, fierce arguments erupted over whether slavery would be permitted within them. These disputes contributed directly to tensions that would eventually lead to the American Civil War. Meanwhile, Mexico faced the difficult task of rebuilding after defeat. Political instability continued, economic challenges persisted, and the memory of territorial loss remained deeply embedded in the nation's identity. Today, the Mexican-American War remains one of the most consequential conflicts in North American history. It reshaped borders, altered the balance of power on the continent, and transformed the futures of both nations. What began as a dispute over Texas ultimately changed the map of North America forever.